so much. I am so happy to be here today. There's nothing I love more than to talk about job searches, job finding, job retention in the nonprofit sector. And I think what we're going to start out by doing is just each talk a little bit about who we are and what allows us to sit up here with you and in front of you today. And I will definitely be looking for any questions or comments as we go through. And this is something that I was kidding we could stay till 1:30. So there's a lot to cover, which we won't do, but I think all of us would also be available after today to talk. So in terms of what I've done, I worked for nonprofits for many years, mostly social services, and then got to work for an international nonprofit to help local organizations with capacity building services. And this was maybe 20 years ago when succession planning and transition management for nonprofits wasn't really yet a thing. It was sort of like, good luck, put an ad in the paper, turn to your neighbor, you know, do something to do some replacement, but not necessarily a healthy transition. So out of that, I got to write a little book about transitions when there weren't many in nonprofits. Now there's probably 17 that are fantastic and great. And then since then, for about 15 years, I've been working with individuals who are looking for jobs, and even more so organizations who are looking for people. And organizations that sometimes are going through a very difficult time because there is turnover that isn't always healthy, and the whole continuum, and sometimes it's a really very healthy transition where we have notice and there's a plan in place and we can do a replacement. So with that, I will turn over to our next person.
Thanks, Mindy. Hi, good morning. I'm Jane Schroeder, and I'm a career coach here in the greater Milwaukee area. And I've been really privileged throughout my entire career to really basically be helping other people develop their own careers. And I really believe that career fulfillment is possible. So we're here to also instill some hope, even though sometimes the process is daunting, and we get that. Personally, I have worked in corporate America, I've worked in higher ed, and I've worked in nonprofit organizations myself. For the last 16 years, I've had my own business, currently Momentum Partners, and we do coaching of teams, coaching and development of individuals and teams. So as with Mindy, we work both with organizations and with individuals looking to make some change in their career perhaps. And there's a significant portion of our business is serving the nonprofit industry right now. Our approach to career coaching is really an inside-out approach. And so what we're going to talk about a lot today is the tactical aspects of the actual job search, which is the external part of it. And we work majority on the front end with our clients to help them assess their strengths, their interests, their emotional intelligence, their interests and desires, and then help them explore possibilities and then get into the tactical aspects. So there is a front end to all of this. And we would certainly contend that doing all of the tactical side certainly helps a whole lot when you get, or doing the internal work helps you greatly when you get to that tactical side and you're actually in front of someone who has the ability to hire you.
I am Celeste Rom, and I am the Director of Corporate and Human Resources for Executive Director Incorporated. So a little bit of a different view in that, you know, career coaching. I work in HR. My really whole career has been in HR. And for those that, I think an audience that probably looks at jobs that serve a lot, we do have a lot of positions on there. And so our business is association management. So we manage different nonprofit organizations that are medical and scientific field, typically membership-based organizations. And so we do everything that goes into running them. So although EDI is for-profit, we really manage nonprofits, so we work within that business space. So like to get out in front of people that are interested in working in nonprofits, because that's truly what our business is. You're working with volunteer leaders, community mentors, board members that work in these fields. and helping them really carry out their strategic plan. So that being said, and I'll have something that I'll kind of plug at the end that we're doing for scholarships for a program that we're offering here in Milwaukee at our office in October. But from my day-to-day, my perspective is probably, I will say I don't do as much of the day-to-day recruiting anymore in my current position, but have certainly been in HR for a long time and have been on the other side of the table job hunting at one point as well. So.
I am Donna Daniels, and I have worked both in the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors. I currently am in recruitment in human resources with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, and my focus pretty much my entire career has been interviewing and hiring individuals for specific roles, and it's really been soup to nuts. I've done finance, I've done physicians, I've done dentists, so I've done a lot of different roles within corporate America and not-for-profit organizations. So I'm here to answer any questions about how you get in front of an employer and what to do once you're in front of the employer.
Great. Hi, I'm Sally Kubly. It says on here that I work for the UWM School of Continuing Ed Career Transition Center. That center doesn't exist anymore, so I was in a job search myself a number of years ago. I work for an outplacement firm, Lee Hecht Harrison, and then I work as a private coach. I bring a background in social work to my career coaching, very interested in helping people with their search, empowering them, providing support. I have a couple certifications in career assessments and in resume writing. At one point in my career, I served as an executive director of a small foundation in Milwaukee for 11 years. Enjoyed that. So I'm happy to be here today and answer your questions.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have a whole list of topics that we went over with Bryce to cover, but I thought before doing that, just put it out there. Are there questions? Is there anything that you want to ask? Because we can start there.
On something that you're sending an application to a job, how do you make sure you get to the next step? How do you make sure that, to what extent you follow up and say, hey, really interested in this position, and gotta make sure that it's it.
Okay, that's great. Did everyone hear that? About follow-up, what's follow-up is appropriate and wise once you've electronically submitted an application.
And especially when you have these sitting out these new electronic systems that force you to put information about your salary and what your salary expectations are, and then they try to upload your resume, and that turns out to be kind of a mess, and they actually look at the resume prepared versus the system and all that good stuff.
I know we have thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay. I shouldn't ask so many questions all
No, we've talked a lot about it. It's important.
I think it is an excellent question. I mean, I, some years ago, was in the job search mode, hadn't planned to be, and I was in it thick with submitting these electronic, my resume, my application, wondering if it fell into a black hole. And there is no way around that type of a system because of the amount of resumes and applications organizations get. That is a way for a recruiter who usually sees about 75 resumes a day. That's how many we're reading each day. It's a way to select, and kind of rank individuals. So I feel like any recruiter that's worth their salt is every day in their system looking at their submittals. Now, I can tell you that the team I work with at Children's, we have blocked time on our calendars just to look at new resumes so that we're not missing anybody. And the team I worked with at Northwestern Mutual, the same thing. So I really respect the recruiters I've worked with that, we don't want to miss that diamond in the rough or the person that could slip through the cracks. We want to make sure we're looking at all of the new applications and resumes that are coming through. So how do you stand out? How do you make your resume stand out? If a recruiter has like 2 minutes to skim a resume, I say keep it to one page if at all possible. Don't put, if you can avoid it, don't put every single job you've had like back to when you worked at Wendy's. You know, we don't need that. That just adds things to your resume that probably don't, it's probably not relevant right now. Take each position and just do 3 or 4 bullets of what your responsibilities were in that job, so that it's just really clean and really easy to read. When it comes to salary, there's so many opinions on this, and there's a lot of really bad advice out there. Just like, you know, individuals don't like putting down what they're seeking in terms of salary or even what they're earning, because they don't want to be screened out. Or they're afraid, well, gosh, if I put this down, the company might get me on the cheap. You know, maybe I could have received a better offer if I didn't share what I was looking for or what I was earning. It's all really bad advice, because recruiters, again, if they're worth their salt, and I do this all the time, if I see somebody that looks amazing and I see that they might be too high in the salary for what we could potentially offer, I'm going to pick up the phone and have a conversation with that individual just to make sure that what I'm seeing is correct, and really trying to dig in as to what they may be looking to earn. So I mean, I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to
Sure.
that.
I would comment on, I think years ago we could send one resume to many jobs, and my personal strategy with clients is they should customize a resume a bit to speak to the opportunity. So look at the posting carefully and ask yourself, you know, am I qualified? And if you are and you truly have the skills in the posting, then make sure you include those, especially in your summary section. I often create a table of skills near the top so that when someone's reading your resume, right away they see that you're a fit. Hopefully you've made it through the applicant tracking system, the software that's going to check for keywords. And then the HR person or the recruiter also sees pretty darn quickly, this person has the right skills. I would like to meet with them. And Jane, would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, and you know, I think that utilize the information that you have. So the posting is a wealth of information. You can tell what they're emphasizing, you know, what the keywords are that they're really focusing on, and then, you know, make sure that those are included in your resume as well.
And I feel like we didn't get to the follow-up piece of what you were asking. That's a really good question. I think that a follow-up email, if there is a recruiter name listed, I know that my name is attached to a lot of the postings that we put out there. It is perfectly, I am happy to receive an email from someone saying, just wanting to make sure that my application made it through. And I always let the individual know, yes, you're in the review process, and you know, we will be following up with next steps, so that the individual knows it didn't fall into a black hole. But I've had people that have called me weekly, and that gets very cumbersome, only because, you know, much of my day is spent in interviewing people, or making sure I'm looking at new submittals in the applicant tracking system. So I can't keep in touch with people about where they are in the process. There's just too many. But a follow-up email just to make sure that your information was received, I think is perfectly fine.
I think also if you know other people in that organization, go ahead and reach out to them. I mean, I don't think that's an end run or anything. You know, to me, we're just getting to know candidates, and so to know that you know a board member and another leader and 3 people is just great. And we're going to put it in there, and we start to know, you know, learn more about you. So as long as it isn't obnoxious, which I don't think you would do, you know, it's really okay. And I'd love to see if people are really interested. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
My question relates to parents who've been out of the workforce for a while they let one spouse career take over, and then they're coming back to it. Are there any organizations that help get these parents back into the workforce?
Well, as an individual career coach, I have worked with numerous individuals in that scenario where they're looking to transition back in. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I would put a plug in for UWM School of Continuing Ed, in that sometimes someone returning to the workforce needs to brush up on some skills, maybe add a class or two. that can look terrific at the top of a resume, and suddenly the gap makes sense, you know. So.
But I think that's kind of where the cover letter comes in, like kind of being able to explain those things. Like, I feel like, and I don't feel like I'm so, but you know, when I went to school, it was very much like you did a cover letter, you sent thank you letters, you did, and I feel like that sort of went away a little bit as consistent, as I haven't seen, and we recently moved to a new applicant tracking system, which is a much better system for us. You know, I don't know, a candidate feels hopefully better for them too. But that being said, I've seen hiring managers certainly take more note when people take the time to do that and to explain, but then also, as we talk about, you know, tying your skills to the job and things, you know, some are very obvious that it's like, I took out this job name and I put in this job name, or I took the wrong job name, and, you know, that attention to detail and that, and like, sometimes it's literally simple proofreading, grammatical things that come through that people are just, they're done looking. For us, we work with doctors and medical professionals, so they're very, that communication for certain clients is extremely important. And so they will, you know, those little details, like taking the time to do that really can be your yes or no, you know, of which pile you move to.
I definitely agree with the follow-up. If you have had the opportunity to interview for a position, it is thought of very highly if you send a thank you note. And I will tell you, the last 2 jobs that I got, this job at Children's and my former job at Northwestern Mutual, every single person that touched me in that process, I sent a card. I got a box of cards and I wrote a note to each individual. And I had people tell me that they thought that was great. When I did it at Children's, again, I got this commentary probably a couple months after I was settled in, and everyone said that they thought that was really, really nice, and it made me stand out. So I can't speak more highly to sending some kind of communication and thanking everybody, even the person at the front desk who greets you and you say, I'm here for an interview. A note, it goes a long way. It goes a long way.
And I don't know if we completely answered the question about returning to work. Sometimes we can leverage our volunteer work. Sometimes I might help a client with their summary. It might be a little longer in terms of some skill set before we get into the chronology, the reverse chronology of their actual work history. But don't forget to leverage your volunteer work.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's an overall, too, to remember that employers are as happy to, find you as you are to find them. This is a reciprocal relationship. And, employers are thrilled to find somebody who's terrific. So flaunt it. There were a whole bunch. You had your, first.
Well, I have 2 questions. So if you're applying for different jobs at the same organization, is that appropriate? So if there are different jobs, but it's the same organization, does that look good or does that not look good?
It depends. And I'm not kidding about this. We call them frequent flyers. In human resources, sometimes only if there are a number of jobs you're appropriate for, you should be sending your application in for those jobs. But we've had individuals that apply for things that they're not remotely qualified for. I was working on an attorney position, and I had somebody, a very entry-level, somebody right out of school looking for their first job that applied for a corporate attorney position. That doesn't look great, because the person on the receiving end is, seriously looking at all of these applicants, and you look, and the applicant tracking systems lots of times will show you how many positions in the organization that the individual has applied to. And I think this person, it said something like 47, and I was like, oh my gosh, 47 jobs. And so in that way, it's not appropriate. But if you have a skill set where you have really great administrative abilities, that could apply in many, many areas. So I would say if it's appropriate and you meet the minimum qualifications that are listed, you should apply for those jobs.
And we actually encourage, like on our career site, in our business a little more unique in that it's different client teams, and so it's a different hiring manager. So we encourage people to apply to any position that they're interested in, qualified for, because it's a different hiring manager and it's just going to get you a quicker look for teams, and some are further in the process than others. We do have like a general resume bank, so if there's nothing that you see at this time, you know, at least gets you in the system. To your point, at the same time, you know, if you're really applying for things that you're not qualified for, that to us just shows you're not really that engaged. You're just sort of flooding the market and not really applying for things that you're even genuinely interested in doing either.
Regarding the follow-up thank you notes, if my interview is with a panel of board members for a nonprofit organization who clearly don't work at that organization or have an office there, would I ask them for their business cards in order to send them the thank you notes, or how would I most appropriately?
Yeah,
I would.
absolutely.
And I wonder if their website would even have their board contact. I don't know. Emails, I'm not sure. It depends, yeah.
But it's perfectly fine to ask for their card.
Right, do you have a business card you could share? And people, I mean, I always carry them. If they do and they share it, send them a little note. Yeah.
Or send them to your contact person who will then distribute them.
Right.
Because I agree with all that, but it's interesting because I almost only work with board members because I'm hiring usually at the top level. And when people go and they say, oh, you're looking, see there at Rockwell and send a note, I think that shows good initiative, but I've heard a lot of people say that felt creepy to me. So to send a note? To like find, you know, they're there because they're representing Sojourner Family Peace Center, right? And so they're, so then for someone to find out they work at Rockwell and send it there feels, the word creepy is what I've heard. So just a little FYI, through your contact, or if you got the information, great. It's weird, but yes, you had.
I have a follow-up to this topic. Is it appropriate to send an email the same day of an interview and then a thank you note? Is it okay to have a 3-day gap while the thank you note is traveling through the mail? Or does the recruiter expect an email the same day as well?
I don't expect that at all. I mean, and you don't have to do both.
Yeah.
If you've sent an email saying thank you, that's perfectly fine. I think a card, it sounds old-fashioned, but it goes a long way to send something that's handwritten. If an email is better, if I get a thank you at all, and people that have interviewed the candidates have received a thank you, I think that that's wonderful. One way, and it doesn't have to be immediately.
Can't go wrong with with multiple thank yous. It's like good fundraising.
I have a question about professional development opportunities and career planning. I've been really lucky in my experience in nonprofits to have a manager that sat me down and talked about my short and long-term goals within the organization and outside it. But I found in nonprofits usually trends toward being just on me to really plan my career and seek out professional development opportunities, to the point where sometimes I've had managers question if like going to events like these is really a worthwhile use of my time. Do you have any suggestions about justifying looking for opportunities and
Wow, I mean, you're talking about a certain mindset, right? Because that can feel threatening to a manager. It shouldn't, right? And we would hope that everybody wants you because you want to be there and want you to develop as you want to. But in reality, you know, not every manager is going to love that idea. I think, and I think you need to do it anyway. That's my thought, because really part of my message with all of my clients is that you are in charge of your own career. You know, there is no one else that is as interested in that as you, and so you need to be doing that. You need to take care of your own career development. It's a beautiful thing if your manager supports that. So I would keep on it and, keep, sharing, and it's going to depend. The rationale is going to depend for every, everything you want to attend, what that thing is about. Today it can just be about, your interest in ongoing, management of your own career. And that could be both internally and externally. And in reality, every manager knows that. They just, it can raise panic if, if they really love you and need you to stay with them right now. So I don't know, does anyone else have any specific ways to
I would just say
rationale?
that when we get out to workshops, we get inspired and we bring that energy back to our workplace. Maybe there's a way to share some things you've learned with your coworkers, but we all need that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There are some donors and funders that will ask about what's the bench strength in the organization now. If I'm going to invest and if that leader changes, do other people know the other areas of the business? So I think that can be a good case. Not just making it about yourself, which of course is a contribution, but about how we have layers of institutional knowledge and professional experience. So write a position paper. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
My question is about salary forcings. Like, I've seen a lot of positions that don't offer a salary range, and then I've called HR and they don't provide that, but then will require me as an applicant to provide either my salary or salary requirement, which just feels really one-sided. And last year I had an experience where there was a job I thought was a really great organizational fit, the position was a good fit. I provided them my salary requirement. They would not provide me the range of position, and then their best offer didn't even come within 10% of what I make now. And it just felt like a waste of several months' time on everyone's part. Including theirs, but to go through that whole process and not take into account the range that I had provided. So what's your advice for navigating more opaque postings, especially when it comes to something like salary, where there may not be a whole lot of flexibility either on my end for the minimum or on the employer's end?
We could spend half a day talking just about this topic. It's such a good question. And I mean, I'll take it on myself a bit here, just as someone who has been a job seeker throughout my life. I don't know why it's never bothered me to put down what my minimum requirement is, because if my minimum requirement cannot be met by the employer that I'm interested in, then we both know right from the get-go. When I applied for a position at Northwestern Mutual, that was a destination employer for me. I was working at Aurora Healthcare at the time, and I really wanted to work there. And they asked me to provide what my minimum requirement was or what my salary was, and they did not provide anything regarding the salary of the position. I didn't care. I knew what I needed, and I put down a real number, and it was a low number. They didn't come to me with an offer that was great. We can get her for $10,000 less than we thought. Because most organizations have internal equity, and they want to make sure that they're not bringing someone in to do the same job 10,000 above or 10,000 below, because that causes all kinds of issues. So the number that I provided didn't affect my getting an offer. They just knew they could afford me, and when they made me the job offer, it was a very fair job offer. So going in, if I had not provided any information, but they loved my background, and we got to the 11th hour and both wanted to get married, and then they realized they couldn't afford me, yeah, that would have been a lot of wasted time. But there's no way to get to get mass individuals to trust that an organization isn't trying to just find out about your salary requirement because they want to lowball you. They're really asking because there's a lot of people interested in the job. They need to figure out who's within the salary range and then go from there. That being said, even individuals that may put a salary down that's high, we're still looking at the paperwork and saying, oh my gosh, but this individual looks so amazing. I'm going to pick up the phone and find out if what they need is really what they need, or if they just were like, well, I didn't know what to put down, which is an answer that I get a lot. So sometimes it's really great to have that conversation. When I have that conversation, I tell the individual what the salary range is. I will say our cap is 90 or our cap is, whatever it is. Then it's up to the individual to decide if they can work within that range. I hope that answers the question.
I just had experiences where they're not transparent, and I don't understand why an employer, if they have a cap or a range, what are the reasons that an employer would not be transparent about that with a job seeker, right? Like if your range is 47 to 62, what are the reasons for not saying that besides a negotiating position or having more information?
Sometimes it is because when you tell an individual that the range is from X to Z, they only think about Z. And really, what happens lots of times, and I've certainly seen this as well, is somebody may come to an organization that pays much better than where they had been previously. It's sort of it's a catch-22 in some ways, because people are usually reasonable, but if you're coming into an organization that has a much broader salary range than what you've been used to working in, it's still not up to that new organization to make up for the years that you may have been underpaid. So they will make a fair offer based on experience, but they are not going to, necessarily make it to that high, side of the range, if that makes sense.
For smaller organizations too, it can be, I don't think it's as helpful with the really large nonprofits, but if you're familiar with GuideStar, the website, people familiar with that, where all the 990s are posted, that can be a really helpful tool. So you can go and see that the top 4 people are being paid 40, and if 60 is your minimum, you've wasted no one's time. So definitely use GuideStar.
I have a 2-part question. So my fiance has a career where we'll be moving often, probably like 3 to 5 years. But I have really great experience. So how do I highlight that instead of just focusing on the moving part? And then also when you're career searching in a new community and you don't know anybody, you don't have any connections, what are your advice for that?
So the 3 to 5 year rotations, the first part, how to describe that?
So is the concern that you look like a job hopper? We talked about the cover letter in use for people that may have spent some time being a stay-at-home parent. I think a cover letter is very useful for that kind of a situation as well, where you can highlight, that you are a trailing spouse most of the time and have made your job transitions due to your husband's career. I think that explains that. That explains that. And then, a lot of us that work in human resources see a trend that there used to be a time where people were so faithful to an employer. I mean, my dad had 2 employers his whole life. And you don't see that anymore. The way we are viewing resumes is not the way that we viewed them even when I began my career in recruitment, where you like to see at least 5 years in each place. Now, I mean, millennials and people that look at a career maybe differently than people back in my day and age, they're making career changes every couple of years. So there's not a stigma as much attached to that kind of movement that you see on a resume any longer.
Right. The 3 to 5 years might be a track that individuals would take by choice, themselves anyway. So that I don't see as a concern. And in terms of, getting integrated into a new community, I think start with group-related things. Use LinkedIn, see if there are local groups that you can connect with that are related to your, to nonprofit organizations. Find out what are the local chapters of national associations. Maybe tap into associations that you're a part of now, and see, what might be available in that locale. Is the first thought.
I think, leaders will meet with you too. If you have a certain area, if you're interested in animal welfare, call everyone who's working on that. You're a potential employee, a potential donor, a potential board member, potential, they should want to meet with you. That's my experience in the organizations that don't have thousands of people in them. So, yeah.
I just want to mention and give a plug that there are chapters of the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network all over the country, and so that's a great way to meet people who are really interested in developing their careers and networking, and they also often have like job postings and things like that. Great. Thank you.
My question relates to education levels. So the applicant tracking system, in the past I've had, most of my positions have been master's preferred. I do not have a master's, but so I have been fine with the master's preferred, but some say master's required. If I don't have a master's, is the applicant tracking software immediately going to spit me out, even though I may be even more qualified than someone who has a paper based on my experience?
Well, and I don't know about your applicant tracking system. It depends.
Yeah, it does.
If you answer a question when you're filling out your application that says, do you have a master's? Do you have at minimum a master's degree? And you check no, the applicant tracking system is set up because it's a requirement of the job to disposition you.
Ours does not, though. Everyone can set it up differently. To me, like, I always look at it as like, I want somebody reading that because maybe it's not this position, but maybe I can use you for something else. So we don't put a lot of qualifiers on ours, but I can understand, especially in medical fields and things like that where they're harder.
I love your question because in HR we talk about this all the time with our compensation department, that's the area that kind of evaluates jobs. And so if there is an area of the organization where all of the higher level leaders have a master's degree, sometimes it causes political issues if we bring people in from the outside that don't meet the minimum qualification of their peers. But that said, I don't ask those pre-screening questions. Even if my job description says that a certain degree is required, unless I'm looking for a doctor or a dentist. I need them to have the right education. But if it's with the master's or even sometimes with the bachelor's, depending on the job, I do not set up a question that's going to disposition those people because, like you, I want to see the person anyway, and if they have amazing experience and it's a really hard to fill position, I'll have a conversation with the leader. And we have made exceptions at Children's in certain areas where we will have a conversation with compensation and say, if this individual is willing to go back for their master's and receives that within X number of years, would we consider this individual? And we have had that as a yes, we will. So
to go along with that, so like for me personally, I've always worked for small nonprofits and had to wear different hats in different situations. So my experience level in a given category is not necessarily the highest. When you have those requirements on job descriptions, how strict are you on those? Because I might not have 3 to 5 years of development experience because I didn't have a position that allowed it because this tiny nonprofit didn't need it. Right.
that's a really good question. I'm actually looking for a couple of people for our foundation right now, and the very first position that I worked on when I landed at Children's was in the foundation, and we were flooded with people in development from all kinds of organizations, big and small. And it became really apparent that in some of the smaller organizations, the development individual did a lot of different things. So if your decision is to leap into a foundation that's established at like a Children's or another larger organization, and you currently hold the title of development manager, well, a development manager in a larger organization means something quite different. You would not be wearing all of those hats, and the level of experience might be, you might need more experience in certain areas. So my recommendation for people that may want to transition into a larger organization with a big foundation is maybe don't shoot for title, go for an associate, go for something that's a little bit lower where you can get in at a certain level within that foundation, establish yourself, get your advocates, and then you'll be promoted up through the chain that way. I hope that answers the question.
I would say still go for it. Kind of like we talked with the degree. Excuse me, because when I'm working with the smaller nonprofits, sometimes there's no human resources department. Majority of the people I work with. And so sometimes, and I'm not being critical, but it's just like 3 to 5 years sounds good. I see it all the time, which actually kind of makes me laugh, like say 4, but whatever. So, it's not even necessarily an absolute, unless it's that you totally don't fit, like you mentioned before.
Right. And I would add, as you write your resume, the bulleted statements, we often call those accomplishment stories. Make sure you grab some really great ones from your background to highlight, so that those are the first things that people read, hiring managers, and bump that up. And some of the other things you've done that aren't relevant, they get bumped down on your resume. Does that make sense?
That's a great, yes. If you're applying for a development position, really pull out the successes you've had in that portion of your job. Yeah.
But and I think to your point, some of it is like if you're looking to go in a field that's a different direction than maybe what you're doing now, or you don't have the experience in it, like you said, take that lower job sometimes, or obviously it's a decision, but if that ultimately gives you the experience you need for your career and to be internally, that it's going to benefit you more. I always use when I came out of school, there wasn't a lot of jobs. And I was coming into school for HR, and so what I did is I worked for a temp agency, and I asked to work in jobs that were in HR departments, and that's what got me the experience to be able to get my next job, and one of them hired me, got me to the next step. So sometimes it's like looking, broadening your scope of like what that looks like depending on where you're at in your career, just to get you the experience that you need. Because the reality is quite honestly, if somebody does apply and they do have the 3 years experience, they are going to get, you know what I mean? Like it's, you have to sort of broaden, and sometimes it's maybe a certain organization you want to work for, and so you get your foot in the door, things like that. So I think I'd just be open to those things.
Yeah, in the yellow or mustard or.
I'm having an opposite problem as a city manager. I'm finishing a bachelor's degree in about 2 or 3 weeks. I've been out of the paid workforce for about 2.5 years. I've kept very busy during that time with internships in my field that I hope to get into. And I have a list of accomplishments, but I keep competing against people who are already in this field. And so, for example, I applied for one job that I wanted a lot, and from a list of over 100, they got down to 17. But the person who ultimately got the job is a person who has experience, current experience. So what can I do to leverage the volunteer work that I've been doing for the past 2.5 years to make myself more competitive? Now, I've been doing about 20 hours of volunteer work at 2 different nonprofits in this field. One of them, I'm actually on the unpaid staff with job titles, but because we're a tiny nonprofit, and I'm competing against people who have higher titles,
mean, it sounds like you're doing everything you need to be doing. So really using that resume document and make sure that you're highlighting everything in the proper order, you know, so that that's the first thing they see is you as the you know, the working professional that you are, you know, regardless of, you know, how you've gotten all that experience, as long as it's highlighted appropriately on the document. You know, I think that's your best bet.
Yeah, I think you're doing a lot right. And I know I was sitting here thinking about when I wanted to transition from being on the firm side of recruitment and human resources to being inside a corporation. I made that decision. It was a very hard transition because I was competing in a pool of people that had corporate experience. All of the job descriptions asked, you know, every time I applied, how much inside corporate recruitment experience do you have? It was 0. I have none. And I kept at it, and sometimes it just takes getting in front of the right person who sees something in you that stands out amongst the group of people you're competing with. And once you do get your foot in the door, you're then gaining all of that experience that will help launch you into the next position that you go for. So,
And for a recent student or a recent graduate, I'll often include coursework, because that coursework is really valuable, and you're getting the latest, greatest coursework, and somebody might be very interested in what you've just learned.
Right.
So I have a sentence like coursework includes or included, and then list some of the classes you think that employer would be interested in.
It seems like you're at the point that this would be a good question. Preparing for the interview, you know, how do you prepare yourself to speak to the right things?
Yeah, preparation. So anticipate questions, and we all have different styles of remembering. For me, I would write down what my answers might be. What examples do I want to share to bring this story to life? You want to be memorable, so you want your examples to be rich and interesting. Also, kind of a fun thing, you can Google interview questions for specific occupations.
Yep.
So interview questions for an executive director, and then get a list of very specific questions to practice for.
A lot of organizations use behavioral-based interviewing now, which is scenario, you know, tell me about a time you went that extra mile for a customer. What it tries to initiate is that the candidate is going to give you a very specific example of when they did go the extra mile for a customer. I always have prepared for interviews by thinking of what my successes have been, thinking about, you know, where my areas of opportunity have been, because those are really typical questions, like what have you done really well, what do you think you need to improve on, you know, give me an example of a crisis you've handled. It shows, you know, are you a flexible person, are you somebody that can think on their feet. So it's just thinking about what you've actually done in your career, and brag about yourself, which is really hard for people to talk about how, you know, they've done a great job and they've been recognized for it.
So it's about your success stories. And again, if you've done your resume in sort of that format where it's action, you know, result, you know, then your resume has already created that in an abbreviated format, and now the interview is the opportunity for you to tell the story around that and fill in the gaps. But also, you know, remembering too, and that's where I like, you know, both the suggestions here of really preparing and like writing down your answers to how you would approach that, because sometimes you can find that you might talk yourself into a corner, and if you prepare, then you can, you know, reverse that. So for example, if someone asks you about how you've handled a crisis, well, you might automatically think of the worst crisis you ever experienced and start talking about that, and then realize that, ooh, that didn't turn out well. I shouldn't have chosen that example, right? So you want to be remembering, how did you turn whatever that was into a success, and build your strengths into those answers as well.
And I would do it out loud. I would write it down and then practice it out loud, just so you can hear your own voice. And, sometimes if you just write it down and then you're actually in the interview, I don't know, I think it helps to have done it in your car, and pretend. But also I would add, use professional examples. I've had people come in and use examples about how they handled a crisis as a mom. And I look at their resume and they've had, tons of experience, and yet they choose something personal. It's best to use a professional example.
Or tape yourself, have somebody, tape you, because it's kind of, we used to do that a lot when I worked in the outplacement side of things, and it was something all the clients absolutely dreaded and hated and stressed over, and it was usually the most beneficial activity ever, because you might have some weird, quirk that you don't even realize, until someone points that out to you. I had one client who was wonderful in practicing with me for an interview and talked with his hands very comfortably and appropriately, and when it came to the taping, he was like this and answered the questions and literally sat on his hands. And so after I said, what was that about? And he said, well, I read, an article last night that said you should not, overuse, your hands, and you want to be yourself. You want to be natural. So don't, the interview isn't the time to, to practice some really different behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing about interviewing, make sure your examples are rich in terms of, don't be vague. If you say, I created marketing materials, that's very boring. How about I created marketing materials including trade show brochures, website content? So you want them to be very developed. Sometimes we can even quantify our accomplishments, meaning adding numbers. So a salesperson could say, brought on 3 new clients, increasing revenue by 15%. Having those numbers gives some context to the story. And people, so in the nonprofit world, what size of donor base were you working with, for example? So there's some context.
Think about what even if it is an organization that might have a casual sort of way of dress, I always think it's better to dress up a little bit more than needed, than come in too casual. I would definitely stress that one.
I think that humility piece is really big. I see that all the time. People are totally undervaluing experience. So I sometimes say, practice with, a trusted friend or colleague or family member. And, where you might say, well, I co-created a program. They might say, come on, you totally created that yourself. And it kind of helps you boost that up a little bit in a way you wouldn't brag, like you said. So practice with someone you know.
Can you address the relative conflict between the HR world, which is generally educated to look for specialization versus generalization, which previously, back in the Stone Age, used to be the way you plugged in somebody who was a generalist. No one is looking for generalists anymore, even though many associations and not-for-profits, that's precisely what they are, is they have fewer employees to handle a more generalized approach. How do you get around that conflict if you've got HR search firms or HR professionals that have that focus? How do you get through that? Because the people you're interviewing with, for your final or secondary or third interviews, they're not coming from that same frame of mind. They're looking for more of a generalized background to be able to handle all of the things that an association or not-for-profit job entails. How do you get through that?
So you're talking about an a position as an HR professional?
I'm talking about an association or not-for-profit job, and you're dealing, they've chosen to either employ an HR firm or some sort of search. And there's a difference as far as the education and training that goes into an HR. They're looking for specialization. Even now you've got specialized HR firms that do just association work. Not necessarily all associations hire that type. I mean, it's a trend of everybody being a specialist. How do you get around being a generalist in a specialized role?
I see the trend being the opposite in terms of the top layer of management of nonprofits, where we're looking for folks that the specialty doesn't necessarily matter as much as all of your whole leadership experience, background, and aptitude going forward. Your ability to be a relationship-driven person, your ability to fundraise, manage internal and externally, hire people that are smarter than you, all those kinds of things. What I think you might be describing is there an inherent conflict between an HR department in a firm and a leader who's doing the hiring? And I don't, right? And I don't think that, I don't think you as a candidate, by the way, can do anything about that. I don't know if it's always true. I don't work with HR, not always, but I don't think as a candidate you can do much about that if there isn't that, synchronicity between them, which we hope there is, that this is who we're looking for. I think that there's some stigma out there that HR's trying to block people. I hear that a lot. And I just think that's so funny because exactly, and I don't even see it happening anymore as much. I see it much more as, when I talk to other HR people, like, oh, please bring us good people. We want them. So I just don't see that, and I just don't see that as much anymore. It's interesting, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to laugh. It's because it's so true that the perception is that some people think of HR as sort of the police and that they're blocking. If HR is supposed to have really transparent and good relationships with the hiring leaders, because it's ultimately the leader that is responsible for making that amazing hire. And I mean, I know that in partnership with leaders that I've worked with in the past 3 organizations that I've worked for, every week we are having candidate review sessions to look at individuals as individuals to see how that person may bring value to the given role. So, I definitely need that partnership. And even if I look at a resume and I don't think somebody is a fit, I still want the leader to see the individual just so that we're on the same page, because they may see something in that background that I don't see. I'm not an attorney, or I just hired somebody in digital marketing. That isn't my expertise. And in fact, in hiring that individual, the leader brought something out of the person that we ended up making an offer to that I didn't see. And so if I didn't have that partnership with the leader, I may have passed on that person. But I've always been really attached to the individuals that are responsible for making that hire.
I mean, we're looking to get them filled. So
right.
It's like our motivation is like we want to find something that works and look at different angles that, you don't have to have A, B, C, D, and E. Maybe you have A, B, and, what can we do to get you to C? And we do, I mean, a lot of people, for us especially, they don't even know association management is like a viable business, like that it's out there. So, people for us, we don't, they don't come to us with experience, so we look a lot at more generalists. But then a part of that is going back to like kind of, okay, if you have more generalist type, roles that you've had, now you're applying for something maybe a little more specific. Well, what are that generalist actually applies to that position, and highlighting that on your resume and what you're applying to, picking out those things that more resonate with that specific job. But in general, I would say that most are trying to not be so stringent because, you know, we want to get it filled too. You know, we certainly have that motivation as well.
You touched a little bit on cover letters, but I'm interested in getting a little more detail on, say, the length of cover letters. And just one job that I looked at recently had just 15 separate qualifications for the job and then 16 additional job responsibilities. I'm like, how do you concisely cover this? It's craziness, you know, because they were very broad. And it kind of builds on this whole generalist thing versus specialist.
That sounds like a terrible job posting. I mean, I'm sitting, right, you know, I mean, I really like to post positions that have maybe 5 bulleted requirements that are absolutely price of admission, needed requirements for the job. And anything outside of that can be brought out in an interview. So if somebody's throwing everything in the kitchen sink into that, first of all, that's a lot to read for a candidate that may be interested, and it almost seems like they want everything. They want everything. And I have problems with job descriptions that get posted like that.
In that situation, what I did is I took their 15 qualifications and I said, here's your qualifications. Here's in a sentence how I meet that qualification, because I didn't want them to be hunting and pecking, saying, well, did you do this? And so it was just check for that.
And just out of curiosity, were those all technical requirements, or were some of them worded like, must be able to present, you know, must have wonderful communication skills?
That was one of them.
See, those I even take those out of my job descriptions because,
When that was like 14 to 15, I just included those because I'm like, whatever, this kind of throwaway stuff, but I'm not going to admit those.
I think too that if, you know, the first line of defense, I guess, is to look at the job description. If it's not clear, like it sounds like it wasn't at all in there, what are their priorities, because there's just too many, then I would go with your best. You know, how can you put your foot forward the best? You know, what of all those 16 things, what are the, 3, 4, 5 things that you can do the best out of those, and highlight yourself that way. I mean, it's a shot in the dark, but really, you know, that's when you're looking at that type of job description, that's really your only choice, you know.
I just did a resume for an individual who was responding to a very lengthy posting. And I crafted a summary, and then I did a table of skills so we could speak to the other skills required. So are people familiar with that format? You've got your summary at the top, and then you can have a nice little table. But again, I would look at what are the most important skills noted, and especially in the cover letter, respond to those.
I have a question kind of piggybacking off of that one, which is, so I've had mentors tell me that, so you see a job description, the posting, title, and then there are 5 to 7 bullet points of responsibilities or requirements. And so my mentors have told me, like, yes, if you're interested in, say if there's 7 and you can strongly do 4 of those, and maybe you have some transferable skills, and maybe you don't have any at all, but yes, you should still apply. But then I also hear from people that said, I guess, what are your thoughts on having to be able to check the box on every single bullet point versus transferable skills versus, I don't really have any skills now, but I can tell you how I can. You can't really have that conversation because you're just turning in your resume. So I can't tell you how I can do 5 and 6 bullet point because I've never done them, but if you got into a conversation or if I got an interview, I can explain that to you. So how do you make that show through in your cover letter or resume that I'm really strong at bullets 1 through 4, but 5 through 7 are on the table and I can still come in and do the job?
Well, so I heard 2 different things. I heard maybe you have 4 through 7 that experience-wise, or and then the rest would be transferable skills. A lot of us hire 80-20, and we talk to our leaders about the 80-20. You'll get 80%, and you can bring and mentor the 20%. So I mean, and usually you're not getting the perfect, absolutely perfect candidate for any job. There's maybe a few things that you're going to have to mentor an individual along with, and we do hire that way. So highlighting what experience you do have that pertains to the requirements you see is great. And I think, you know, if you can work in how the rest of those bullets, you've had transferable skills, that's beautiful. Now, if you have had no experience, but you have some transferable skills that cover all of that, that's a little bit harder of a hill to climb, because you'll be competing in a pool of people that may have 5 of those bullets covered. And then a ranking it happens, because, you know, individuals are hiring leaders are probably going to select individuals to interview that meet some of those requirements before they would interview somebody that doesn't really meet the requirements but could have transferable skills.
Yeah, I mean, make the leap for somebody if if they couldn't, so like going with the fundraising example, if you've never done fundraising, but you say, but I'm a really good storyteller and I'm not afraid to ask people for things, well, that's going to make that transition, I think, in some ways.
I wanted to put in a plug too for the Nonprofit Center of Milwaukee has a lot of workshops. So if there were one area you just really didn't get experience in, why not start filling in with a couple classes there? They're very brief, they're inexpensive. Add that to your resume.
All right. And workbooks online, like through BoardSource, inexpensive and, yeah, good point. Yeah.
Most organizations like to promote from within so that they can provide career growth for their employees. How can you set yourself out in an interview when you're coming in as an external candidate to let the employer know that you may not have the organizational memory or the background, but you can get the job done that they're advertising?
I don't know if we all have opinions on this. I work for an organization that has a very strong culture that with a very high employee engagement, and part of that is because we want our employees to know that we will help develop you and give you opportunity. But what keeps an organization healthy is bringing in external individuals with outside experience that think differently and have diverse ideas about how to get things done. And when I look at how much of the hiring I've done in the past year and a half, over 50% of my hires have been external hires. So less than 50% are individuals that we've promoted, and I think that's really healthy. I don't want to think that the internal individuals don't have opportunity to move up in their career, but I definitely feel like we don't want to become an organization that's this big group think and everybody thinks the same and is the same and everyone has history, because then you're not bringing in innovation, and if that's what happens, then I think that the organization stops growing. And we talk about, and even in my former employer, we talked about that very thing, that we have to really be mindful about making sure we bring in fresh perspectives. So I hope that answers. I know that it's hard if you're coming in as an external candidate and you think, well, there's probably internals. That doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get that job.
Yeah. I also think it's an opportunity for you to show alignment with the culture of the organization. So that could be your alignment, but that you would come in with a fresh perspective on things, on the job itself perhaps,
And do a little research. It stands out in an interview if you know a little bit about the organization that you are applying for, like our foundation. There's a lot of information out there about our foundation. If you're interviewing for position and development, I love to hear what you know we raised last year. I love to know that you know who our partnerships are with and something about our organization and hospital, and that makes you stand out as a candidate, as an external candidate.
And you can outshine we do a lot of promotion from within. We have 30 clients that we manage, so we have a lot of people that move. Client teams are different. They're move to a different association where it's really kind of a brand new job to some degree. Probably relational, but sometimes I think I see internals not because it's internal. They don't take it as seriously. They think of it's more of like it's owed to me. Where I've seen externals actually be engaged and really want the job and show that to them, and they end up getting hired due to they want someone that wants to work with them, at the end of the day. So.
How do you feel about putting an online portfolio or a website link onto your resume?
I guess to me it depends on the position. Yeah, so I would say in general people aren't doing that extra. When we hire communication positions, we're maybe looking, then we're kind of asking for examples of work or things like that. So if you have something that really shows that and it's applicable, then I think if you're applying for an entry level course, I don't know that that's necessary. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it depends on what that site is, and does it apply, or is it showing something that really is putting you ahead, or is it just kind of restating your resume in a different place?
Yeah, usually I've had a lot of professors tell you have to have this or you're not going to be even part of it, but that's more of just business in general. I'm looking specifically in the nonprofit sector, so I was wondering what that would, but because I have one right now, and it's mainly, I have a video on there, just kind of talking more about my bullet points and what they are, and having my references actually in the video, so you see them actually talking about me. So it's just an elaboration on the small bit of information I can fit on my resume.
I haven't seen it. I have not seen, and honestly, because of how much many people that are screening the resumes have to read in a week, they may not click on that. They may just look at the resume and bypass the extra.
I don't think it's going to hurt, but I certainly don't think it's an expectation unless, again, it's very specific where you really have a portfolio to showcase in a way that you can't on a resume or in another way. Yeah.
I see the LinkedIn piece a whole lot, but then I also see people who haven't kept that up to date. So if you're going to do it, keep it up to date. And then we immediately go, wait a minute, which one's true? What they sent in or the link?
Yeah, consistency among whatever you're putting out there is really important.
Do we have time for one more question or no? One more. Okay. Yes.
Question, and it relates to getting your resume out there. What are the three most important items that the recruiter looks at when you're submitting a resume to a nonprofit?
If to a specific position, or are you talking about just, for a specific position? Okay, the top three things that.
I guess I'm asking this question because I have more than 5 years of customer service experience, and I wanted to transition those skills over into the nonprofit sector. So I'm getting a little frustrated because I'm not getting that response I was hoping to get. So do you have any suggestions or something that I can do to get that chance to get that interview?
There's I haven't looked at it now for a few months, but there's an organization, Bridgespan, in Boston that does tons of research on nonprofit leadership and trends. and they had a while ago tables for sector switchers, were called, and how to list like your customer service and what the language would be in nonprofit world. So that might be, just some of that translation might be helpful if you search the sector switching.
Well, I guess it's because I either meet or exceed the minimum qualifications that they post. And I'm just not getting any positive responses.
I think it's important to write a really good summary and explain that jump. Now looking to transfer skills to, and what those skills are, and then try to use the nonprofit language. Yeah, but a strong summary could really help.
Yeah, and certainly highlighting any volunteer work that you've done in the nonprofit sector as well. Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, it's obvious, but it's important to remember it's not you, it's the pool. You know, it's just, I mean, sometimes there really are 3 people that are phenomenal.
Yeah, timing.
Right? I mean, it's just, you know, it's hard. And, you know, the odds are it's going to be many, many months. And it's not that there's anything you could be doing differently. Moment in time. So I think that we need to be wrapping up. Bryce, are you coming up to close this for us? Thank you all so much, and thank you for the great questions. It's always fun to be live. Oh, good.